Hey everybody, welcome to Offline. This is the third event in a series that's normally hosted here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I live. I know we've got some offline regulars in the audience, and you may notice a little something different about today's event, which is that we're online, of course. And much of life has been moved online these days, which is pretty amazing in some ways, but creates challenges in others. And we're going to talk a lot about those challenges and some potential solutions in today's event. Our goal with Offline is to show you how to get offline in an online world. And that's exactly what we will attempt to do with our time together. My name is John Zeratsky. Some of my friends call me Jay-Z, and you are welcome to do the same, with apologies in advance for any cognitive dissonance or disappointment that may result. I'm the co-author of 2 books about making time for what matters, both written with our guest tonight, Jake Knapp. The first is Sprint, which is about the 5-day design sprint process that I helped to develop. It's a process that helps teams focus together on the work that truly matters to them in their business. And the second is Make Time. It's a guidebook for individuals who want to rethink the defaults of constant busyness and distraction so that they can focus on what matters every single day. For close to 15 years, I was a designer for tech companies. Among others, I worked at Google and at YouTube and at Google Ventures, where I had the opportunity to go inside almost 200 of the most interesting startups in the world to see how they work and how they spend their time, and to realize that whether high tech or low tech, everyone struggles in the same ways with their time. Everybody struggles to spend time on the things that they really care about. And today, I run a business called Make Time, which provides training and other resources to help professionals, both individually and in teams, make time for the things that matter. Here's how I want to spend our time together today. First, a brief introduction. I'm going to show you a few slides and share a couple of thoughts. Then an interview with our very special guest, Jake Knapp, which will kind of build on the intro. Jake and I, our conversation is really going to put a bit more kind of substance around the stuff that I talk about in the intro. And finally, at the very end, a couple of activities that we'll go through that are going to give you some concrete practical tools that you can use for staying focused and staying sane in this crazy new world that we're all living in. But before we do that, a few thank yous are in order. First, thanks to our esteemed sponsors, to Newance, who has been sponsoring this event since the very beginning, to Diversitech, who got involved because of their interest and their commitment in really supporting their team, their people, and making it easy for their employees, their colleagues to get offline and have time for themselves and to recharge. And finally, to Advocate Aurora, who I think they also have been a sponsor for a couple of events now, but I think that they deserve kind of a special mention with so many healthcare workers, so many of their people on the front lines, helping to take care of those who are most in need, most vulnerable right now due to COVID-19. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to Milwaukee, my friends there who are the organizers of this event. Jeremy and his team have supported the series since it was just a rough concept. And I know we've got people tuning in from all over the world, but when it's safe to travel again, if you ever find yourself in Milwaukee, be sure to check out newwalkie.com, because they host a ton of cool events here throughout the year. Finally, most of all, thanks to you. Even though you can't go outside or do anything, there are still a million other things you could be doing with your time right now, and it really means a lot to us that you chose to be here. So thank you. All right, I know I said that the activities were going to come at the end, but I actually want to kick things off with an activity together. This has become a little bit of an offline tradition, and the activity is to go offline. Now, I don't want you to go completely offline because then you won't be able to see the presentation. But what I want you to do is I want you to grab your phone and maybe if you've got a tablet or you've got something, and maybe I don't know, TV's on, something, any device that is currently kind of taking up some of your attention, some of your bandwidth. And I want you to join me in switching it off. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn off my phone here. You can do airplane mode if you want. You can do, do not disturb, whatever. Freak out a little bit maybe. That's totally natural. And then put it away somewhere. Now, I don't want anybody to be irresponsible. If you are like an on-call doctor or, I don't know, you're one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or something, you should definitely keep your phone on. But for everyone else, I encourage you, I invite you to join me in going offline so that we can be together tonight, here, online, offline, in this room together. So I want to start by introducing the concept of defaults. And I mentioned this briefly before, and this is going to come up a lot over the next, what do we have, about 50 minutes left. And I know it's kind of a wonky word. It's kind of a weird word, but it's a really important concept in the technology world where Jake and I both worked for a long time. A default is the way that something works before you configure it or customize it to your needs. And these defaults are everywhere. We live with technology defaults. For example, our phones, they come pre-installed with all sorts of distracting apps like email and breaking news alerts and streaming video and stock market updates, things that little by little kind of pull at our attention and pull at our time. We've got cultural defaults, things that we do because they're considered sort of the normal or polite thing to do. For example, the default is to say yes to every meeting you're invited to, even if it's not going to be a great use of anyone's time. We've also got, as individuals, we have habitual defaults. We have things that we normally do as part of our daily routine. For example, pretty much everybody does some sort of morning check-in when they wake up. It's the default. It's normal to, as soon as you wake up, grab your phone, your laptop, check your email, Instagram, Facebook, whatever you're into, kind of within that first 30 to 60 minutes of waking up. And each of these defaults affect how you spend your time, what you pay attention to, and what you prioritize. Individually, any one of these defaults probably doesn't seem very important, but when we add them all up, when we put them together, they have a huge effect on how we live our lives because the defaults define our normal. And Jake and I, in our writing and our work and talks that we give and workshops that we lead, we help people reset these defaults. We help people create their own default settings in their technology and in their schedules and in their routines so that they can spend their time on the things that are really important to them. By creating new defaults, it's actually possible to create a new normal for yourself. Right now, we are all living with a new normal, except in this case, it is a new normal that has been created for us. It's been given to us, it's been forced upon us by factors that are outside of our control. And as a result, a bunch of interesting new defaults have settled into place all of a sudden. There was a brief moment a few weeks ago when everything was being canceled or postponed and my calendar began to look a little bit like this. And it was pretty exciting for a minute to see all that empty space. But then it started to fill up again with a huge range of virtual meetings and calls and events and activities, including things like this event that you're attending right now. Now, don't get me wrong, these things are totally cool and I'm grateful for them. But it was interesting to watch as the old defaults went away and they were so quickly replaced with this new default of doing everything online. And because we're now spending so much of our time online, it makes it all the more convenient and all the more likely that we'll just keep doing more stuff online, right? The friction to spending time online has been sort of worn away So it's easier than ever to find that we're really spending all day in front of a screen. And between all these defaults, we may find that our days are more likely than ever to float by in sort of this gooey blur where we look back and we wonder, what happened? And I know that I've been feeling this way. Sometimes I have trouble remembering what day it is or even what month it is. But that's the new normal that we're living in, at least for now. But we believe it's possible to nudge this normal, to adjust it, to actually design it. These things, they have not totally solidified yet. There's still a bit of room to kind of shape these defaults and shape this normal around the things that you care most about. And there are a bunch of ways that you can do this. For example, you can make adjustments to your technology that keep you from getting sucked in to that next online thing. You can create a new schedule for yourself, a plan for your day that kind of builds in all those things that you care about. You can try this tactic, which Jake and I will talk about, of setting a daily highlight, which is the one thing that most deserves your energy, your attention, your time, the one thing that you really want to make time for. Jake and I, we're going to touch on all these things in our conversation, and then we're going to go through a couple of activities at the end of the hour. And with that, I'd like to introduce my friend, Jake Knapp. Jake is a writer and designer. He is the creator of the design sprint process. And Jake is a New York Times bestselling author who, along with yours truly, wrote Sprint and Make Time. Jake is a dad to 2 sons. He's married to his wife, Holly. He's got a cat and a dog living in his house. And not too long ago, both his refrigerator and his car died in the same week. So Jake's got a lot going on. Plus, Jake lives in Seattle. And normally, for those of us here in the Midwest, we know that the West Coast of the US, they kind of look toward us, for tips on what the future holds and cues as to trends and, things like that. But as you know, Seattle was the first place in the US to have an outbreak of COVID-19. So in this case, Jake can give us a little glimpse of the future from home. Jake, welcome to Offline.
Hey, thanks for having me on, John, and thank you for that warm introduction. And in fact, I can add to that in the same week, which was last week, that our refrigerator and our car broke down, our bathroom fan also broke, and it's a big problem because there's no window in that bathroom, and it's where we shower, so there's a lot of steam also to go with everything else. So it's been chaotic. It has been a chaotic lockdown here. We're on week, I don't even know, but we started at the kind of right at the beginning of March, maybe the end of February, because my older son, Luke, was very sick with what we now think was coronavirus. We think he was one of the first in the country actually with it, to get it from the community. And he's better now, but yeah, we're getting pretty experienced at being trapped at home. So hopefully that helps in our conversation today.
Yeah. Well, yeah. How have things been going? Like, what do your days look like, and what have you been doing to kind of stay sane and stay focused on the stuff that you care about?
It is a constant battle to stay sane, but I don't mean that in I don't mean to give the impression that I'm on the verge of losing it right now. Just sometimes, there's times when I'm on the verge, or when somebody in the family is on the verge. I think that most folks who are listening now have probably been on lockdown long enough that you're either you're right there with me, and I may not have anything novel to share, but I'll just tell you what the path was like for me, in case it's earlier for you in the cycle. Because at first, the first thing was just the fear of what is going on. And at first, our son was sick. It sort of started with that. So the realization of coronavirus being a real thing here in the United States, and then in our city, it kind of emerged as our son was sick, and we realized he had the exact same symptoms they were talking about. They couldn't explain his illness in any other way, and it was lingering on. And so we were super, super stressed about that. And then as everything shut down and it kind of became like, how do we get groceries? Like what, like basic stuff that I assume most people are in maybe past that state already. Cause eventually in your city or in your community, you kind of figure out, okay, this is, as your slide said, this is the new normal for right now. Here's, we go to the grocery store less frequently. This is the one we go to. It's working for us, whatever. And then, but throughout that, there were these like waves of anxiety and fear and stress. And I started to recognize that they came in waves, and then the wave would eventually pass. But I started to also notice that I was really exaggerating those waves by reading the news a lot. And so one of the first tactics was to put some controls on that, and I can talk more about that. But basically, after those waves kind of started to die down and we got into a normal, it was the same thing that you talked about, where you have the calendar and things start to disappear. A lot of my commitments. You and I do a lot of in-person events, including this was supposed to be an in-person event. And so as those things got canceled and postponed, there was actually, I was disappointed because I love doing in-person events, but the introvert in me and the person who loves an empty calendar was like loving that blank space in the calendar. And then the blank space started to become a problem. I'm, self-employed, and I've realized that without the structure of take the kids to school in the morning, they come home at a certain time, there's this event that I know is coming next week or later this week or whatever, there's a problem with everything being open and with being in reaction mode all the time. And I had to deal with that. And I think that this week and the last week, and like I said, I think we must be all of March and a good way through April. So maybe week 7 on lockdown here. I'm feeling like I'm starting to get into a good groove with it. So it took a while. It took 5-6 weeks, and I'm still kind of readjusting all the time. So that's the not so short view of everything.
Yeah. So what does that groove look like? I mean, you mentioned the news and how you've kind of had to change some of your defaults around that. But I'm sure like you've done things to kind of put some structure into place in your schedule. So, and you can kind of take this whatever direction you want to go, but I'm curious, like after you went through the difficult process of adjustment, where did you land?
Well, starting to look for defaults in the new world of lockdown, to try to see, well, okay, what are the defaults that are going on here? So one of them was the news feels really important, and it was tough because in the beginning the news was important. Really need to know like what are we supposed to do? The rules were changing all the time about what you could do, what you should do, when when you go to the store or whatever, and so reading the news felt really important, and understanding what was going on in the world as it went from like, oh my gosh, there's a few cases outside of China to, gosh, it's a pandemic. It felt like you're watching a zombie movie unfold. And it really felt like very, very important. But that default quickly took hold of like, I need to be on the news all the time. I need to be up to date all the time. And I need to kind of get to the bottom of it. And one of the things that became really unhealthy for me was this sense of like, I need to investigate all the way down the rabbit hole to try to find the real truth at the bottom of it, to try to form a big picture of what's going on. And I think this really hit me hard because at the beginning, when Luke was sick, I was trying to figure out what's all the information I can find out about this disease, so I know what we ought to do and when we ought to take him to the hospital, and because the doctors also were not ready to treat this thing, so they didn't know. So I'm reading the CDC thing, and I'm reading the white papers that have been written so far about what happened in Wuhan. I'm trying to understand everything. And then it's hard to get that wheel to stop spinning, even after you get out of like crisis mode. And then you're just like reading the news. I was spinning all the time. So anyway, what eventually happened was my wife and I came up with a bargain. And the bargain was one at a time, we take turns being the news reader. And the news reader's job is to read the news and be prepared to give the other person the gist of what we need to know. What do we need to know about the news? And it could be things of interest, but mostly, this question of what would I read if the extent of what I'm supposed to read is what I need to tell my wife is very powerful. It puts the brakes on quite a bit. And then the other thing is that the days when I'm not on the news, when the agreement is I won't read the news at all, it's a huge relief. And it started to just like break my habit of being on the news all the time. So that trading off on the news was a huge deal for sure.
Did you also make any I know that you have a distraction-free phone, for example, which is a phone that doesn't have any of infinity pool apps, any of those apps that we talk about that sort of have that infinite supply of content. But I'm wondering,
right? No email, no news, no social media on the phone. Yeah.
Did you, to reinforce this new default of sort of having news duty? Did you have to make any like other technology adjustments in order to support that?
Definitely. Yeah. I had to get back to the habit of using Freedom on this computer back here. So this is a computer that I write on. And we moved to Seattle last summer, and I had really gotten in a good habit of when I'm at this desk, I write. That's what I do here. But with the news chaos, I kind of started to break down, and I always was wanting to check the news. And the Freedom app will allow you to shut off access to the internet in general, or to target specific websites or apps that are a distraction for you. And so I just got in the habit of using that all the time up here to reinforce the idea that when I'm here, I'm doing whatever it was I intended to be doing, whereas the news becomes this unintentional sort of default mode.
Did you also, like, I'm curious, I'm very intrigued by this idea that you have like a certain place for a certain activity, and writing is like your main thing, right? That's like if you had to pick like one word for like your job, it's like you're a writer, right?
Yeah. I think that's true.
Did you also like construct your schedule? Did you have like at a certain time I'm doing this thing, which means I'm not doing that other thing, or is it not that rigid?
No, it's funny because at first I thought, what luxury, the calendar's open and no one's expecting me to be anywhere. This is great. we can't even see our friends in the city, which is hard. I can't see my family. It's hard. I don't want to diss my friends and family, but in a way it's a great relief. There's a whole category of thing I just don't even have to think about. No social engagements. But well, everybody knows, and I think people with kids, if you have kids who were in school and now they're at school and they're doing some form of homeschool, that becomes a big family responsibility. And also I was talking to a friend with kids here, and he says, it feels like all we're doing all day is just making meals or cleaning up for meals. And boy, that is just totally true. It felt like all of a sudden these days were wide open, but they were simultaneously full of things that had to get done. And then also just reaction. And sometimes when everything's open, nothing's open, like when everything is clear, there's nothing. And so I remembered your advice and what you do. And it took me a while. This took actually a few weeks of banging my head against the wall and being frustrated with why aren't I writing? When I got out of this mode of having a lot of anxiety, which was the first few weeks, and I started to feel more comfortable, it felt like I've got the right mental energy, but it's still not happening. What's going on? And I talked to my friend Kristen, who was kind of a coach for me on trying to help me get writing done. Because when you ask if I'm a writer, I'm like, yeah, I guess I am, but I'm always trying to struggle to actually do it because I'm like, great. Really, what I'm best at is procrastinating. And so what I ended up doing was sitting down with my wife and making, and this was the most tedious thing. But it was so worth it. This has been the best thing we've done since the virus, to sit down and make a schedule together for each day, and sort of a template that we're going to work from, which is a John Zeratsky. You can look up calendar template, and I believe, you maybe need to type JZ as well in order to get the template. But it's an awesome technique where you just go into Google Calendar and you block off what you hope to happen. And it's so great because you start to realize the trade-offs that you have to make. You start to realize the realities of how long certain things take. You go through a day where you're trying to follow that calendar, and if you track then what actually happens, you realize, oh, I totally underestimate how long this thing is going to take, and overestimate how much time I'll have for here. And then when you're following that schedule and it starts to become realistic, it creates urgency when there should be urgency. Like, wow, if I'm gonna go for a run, like looks like tomorrow, it looks like I better get up a little bit earlier, do it before everybody, or gets up. Or if it's important to me to be the one who makes breakfast, then I need to block that out like this, and I need to understand that writing time won't start until here, and I need to really have a sense of urgency when I get there, because that's the only window all day. And I don't have time to look at the news. I don't have time to check my email then. I really have to get to it. So making that calendar template has been the thing in the last couple of weeks that's really opened things up and made me feel better. And even when things are a bit out of control, going back, like when the car broke down or the fridge broke down, going back and marking that on the calendar, because it gave me then a sense of like, oh yeah, that's what happened. The highlight for the day became, okay, we have to actually like tear our cabinets apart because our 30-year-old funky shaped fridge has to come out of there. So that's been a good one.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the highlight in a bit, and we'll do an activity that's kind of about practicing this idea of setting a highlight. But I think it's worth mentioning that, like, sometimes ideally you can proactively choose and say, this is the thing that's most important to me today. But other times the world kind of chooses your highlight for you. The world says, all right, like all hands on deck, you got to take care of this thing. And in those days, it's better to shift your focus and deal with that thing instead of, kind of blocking it out and saying, no, my highlight was to do this. Like, here's my schedule, my perfect plan. Like sometimes, especially like in chaotic times, you need to roll with the punches and be willing to change your plan.
Yeah. I think that with the highlight, which we'll talk about, and with this idea of a design your day schedule, a calendar template, at my best with those things, I am purposeful and pliable. So I have a purpose, I know what it is, and I'm ready to focus a lot of energy on one thing. But when the terrain shifts unexpectedly, I'm pliable enough to change and shift that purpose to the new thing. And you get so much farther if you really drive on one thing in a day as much as you can. You make a lot more headway than if you're dabbling. Now, I really have to couch all that with at my best, because many days I'm not at my best. Many days I screw up. But with these tools, I have a hope of having some days that really sing.
Yeah, that's a good reminder, because we never want to give the impression that that anybody should aim for perfection, or that's even possible when it comes to this stuff, especially now. We have a few questions coming in from the audience, and I'm going to combine two of them. So there's a question from Hannah and a question from Barbara that are kind of related. So I'll try to combine them. So Hannah wonders whether your kids are old enough to do schoolwork on their own, and Barbara wants to know how the schedule works with the kids and whether they quote unquote get it, like, which I assume means kind of like, are they on board? Are they bought into the schedule, or does it feel like some external thing that's like happening to them?
Yeah. You're probably going to I was going to start to answer the first one, and then you may have to remind me of the second one, because my brain is so limited, but they're totally connected. So my kids are old enough to do schoolwork on their own. But they're also not able to do it entirely on their own. And I say that not to throw like my 16-year-old under the bus, because he's very self-sufficient, but there's an extent to which I am, old enough to have a 16-year-old, and I can't really do my work on my own. Like like I said, like I have my friend, he's a coach who helps me. I have John, who I'm always talking to, like, John, I'm just dealing with this thing. Like, how should I deal with it? Even as a person who has co-authored a book on, sort of managing your attention. I need help with this stuff all the time. I constantly need a sounding board. I need to talk through, like, here's what's going on. Can you help me find the glitch or the default that I'm not seeing? And I really benefit from that. And I think that, my 16-year-old definitely, benefits from that too. So we talk about what's a good strategy for dealing with this situation. Was weird where you're at home and you have to create boundaries. So we did get to the point where, like I said, like, we just implemented the schedule. My wife and I implemented it. And I would say that our younger son kind of has to, he's kind of forced to deal with the schedule and is pretty cool with it. He's pretty like chill. And really like kind of enjoys the schoolwork that they're sending home is like pretty fun for him. So he's cool with it. My older son was like, kind of getting to this point where he's like, okay, the novelty of doing school from home is definitely wearing off. And like, he's bit over it, and like actually said, okay, I want to give the fully scheduled day a try. And so we did like the fully scheduled day. I sat down with him and we made one just over the weekend. And he was like, oh man, that was way better. He felt like he had a really great day. That is not to say that he'll continue doing that every single day. And I don't think every single day I'll sit down and micro schedule every minute, but it's a really quick way to create new habits, because if you do 2 or 3 days following a new schedule, one of the big things you do is you can start to figure in these like triggers that happen, right? So like, if before the trigger for example, take a shower was like, oh, I'm going to be sure I take a shower before I take my younger son to school, but now I'm not taking him to school. Like, I have to find a new pressure point or a new trigger to do that. And if I do it like 2 or 3 times and I've got a recurring event on my calendar and my phone buzzes or my watch buzzes to let me know that it's time to do that thing, then pretty soon I've got like a new habit. And I think that's helping him as well. Let's see. Did I cover some of those?
You answered both the questions, I think.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that was great. We have a couple more questions. I just noticed the cool Q&A box, and I don't know if everybody can see this, but Ryan asks if we've tried using a shared calendar with loved ones. And he says he feels that better communication and openness between spouses helps in these chaotic times. And I will say that is what my wife, Michelle, and I do. We use Google Calendar, and we both have our own individual calendars, and then we have a shared calendar. And we're like always talking about, what's going on, what's the plan for today, but we definitely use a shared calendar. And it actually sort of reminded a question that I wanted to ask you, Jake, which was like this template that you made, this new schedule for the family. Like, where does that live? Like, where did you write it? Is it software? Is it paper? Like how did you actually do that?
It does live in Google Calendar, and and we do use shared calendars. We use Google Calendar. So like, I have one and my wife has one and my son has one, and we can see them all. It's, Google Calendar, we worked at Google. I think it's all right to say that it's a good product, but it's also like, it could be easier to use. It's a bit tedious to set up a template and like do all the recurrences and try to figure out. And part of that is just the nature of like thinking calendar in a calendar way. And part of it is like, maybe the UI could be a little easier, but it's a big investment to do things that way. And I think that the default for our family was instead to just kind of, if we talked about the day, to just talk about it and maybe make like a checklist on paper, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's hard with a checklist to not feel like you're making this commitment for the day. And often those commitments are like not realistic. Like the number of things that we hope to accomplish, especially if we get everybody's input on the things they hope to accomplish in the day, when you factor in the meals that need to happen and the schoolwork that needs to happen and the work that I need to do and the work that my wife needs to do, like, it's not feasible that we're going to get everything done. And so on the calendar, you can actually start to see the trade-offs. It's a tedious task to set that up and try to manage the recurrences and figure out which things are going to happen on the weekend or not. But I think Google Calendar is a really good tool for it. It's the best one that I know of, even though it is far from perfect.
Yeah, it's the type of tool that is designed to accommodate a lot of different uses. And, one thing that I think is helpful to understand about Google Calendar is that it started out as like an internal calendar tool for people who worked at Google. And so like, it came from this world of, you know, you're managing your work calendar and other people are adding stuff to your calendar. And it's like, you're inviting people, you know, big teams to these group events and stuff. So it's, you know, it's not great for everything. And it's certainly not purpose built for something like creating a calendar template, kind of a rough plan for your family. But I thought it was interesting what you said about like sort of the difference between just making a checklist or, you know, kind of a list of things versus a calendar. And I often feel like the fact that it's harder to do it on the calendar is kind of a good thing. Like it's a helpful kind of feedback that you get, like, oh, like, wow, if I want to do this thing, like just writing it on a list is too easy, you know, because that doesn't lead to the actual challenges in getting it done. But if you look at your calendar and like, all right, where's it going to fit? Like, how much time is it going to take to like be ready for it and to like, you know, build in the buffer time in case it goes over or whatever. Like it is harder, but I think in kind of a helpful way.
Well, you and I talk about to-do lists a lot as being problematic. If it is part of, there's a theme across all this stuff. The path of least resistance is deadly, or not, maybe not deadly, but it's dangerous. And the defaults often steer us towards the path of least resistance because we naturally take the path of least resistance. I certainly do. And then those things stick and they become the things that we always do. So it's easier to write down the things that we hope to accomplish on a to-do list because we don't have to make any tough trade-offs. It's not hard to do that. But doing that often means the most important things don't happen because we haven't figured out how they're going to happen and when they're going to happen. We haven't designed the space for them. And it's just like, you know, doing email, which is an easier thing to do, often takes precedence over other things. Checking the news often takes precedence over other things because it's really easy to go to the news and feel outraged and feel like you're up to date and outraged and get that little like boost of, or you're like scared or whatever, but you get like an emotional charge and you get this sense of like being up to date. And that's much, much easier to do than any, you know, almost any other thing you might need to accomplish in the day. Certainly easier, you know, it's easier than making a meal or cleaning something up or going outside to get some exercise or closing the doors and dancing, which is something we've started doing. And John, you know me, I'm not really like, you probably don't know me as like a dancer. That's not really a thing that I'm into, but we've taken that up as a big emotional booster, actually. Which I recommend. But all those things are like, they're much harder than email and news and writing down to-do lists. So we have to work a little harder up front, but then it's like you pay that investment up front, you create new defaults, or you at least create temporary new defaults. And those temporary new defaults can become permanent new defaults, especially if you create some barriers to the things that are distracting you or messing you up.
Yeah. Well, I think it's helpful to look at this stuff through the lens of like habits, and the habits are really interesting because it's like, you know, anything you do automatically, there's some like little cue that kind of reminds you to do it. You do the thing and you get like some reward from doing it. And that's what, you know, keeps that habit going. And stuff like email, you know, the easy stuff, the quick check of the news, whatever, it's like a micro loop, you know, it's like this little activity and there's like a little reward and like it kind of keeps going. But the big stuff like dancing with your family is like harder to get going, but the reward is probably a lot greater. Like you probably feel a lot better after dancing with your family than after like spending 15 minutes catching up on email. And so you know, we've talked about this before, but I find that those bigger things, they're harder to get the wheel turning, but the reward is also greater. And so they tend to, if you can get those habits going, if you can build those habits, they tend to be stronger and more powerful than the micro habits that they're replacing. Yeah,
those rewards are really powerful for working on that project you really want to work on, having super high quality family time that's really joyful, having a really nice conversation with your voice with someone, you know, instead of emailing or texting them. A lot of those things bring these super nice rewards that, like, a new habit for me since the pandemic is calling my mom every day instead of calling her like once a week. And I've found that like I expect this reward that I get from talking to her now in the evening. And I'm like, well, I want that. I want that like boost from talking to her. And it's much more powerful than the usual, like whatever email, tidy up, mess around stuff that I might've done in the evening. But it does take some, in this case, it took a pandemic and me being terrified about my mother's health and well-being to establish it. But yeah, once those things change, they can be sticky, but it's also a constant, part of the way we talk about make time is you have to see every day as an experiment, that if it goes wrong, if you feel that it didn't go well for whatever reason, that you don't look at it as a personal failure, you're screwed up, but you just say, well, what happened? What are the factors? What are the things I might change next time? And especially right now, as all of our, I think, day-to-day lives are in a state of flux, you have to be really kind to yourself if you hope to make today and tomorrow better. You have to start by saying, I'm not a screw up. If I screwed things up yesterday, that's not who I am. That's just what happened yesterday. And tomorrow can be different.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even, I mean, I think there's another layer beyond that, which is that it was never your fault in the first place. Most likely because the defaults that I mentioned are so pervasive and so powerful. And also they're like so invisible, we don't see them until we know to look for them. And so we're just kind of, we're acting in response to our environments. But because that stuff happens automatically, we don't see it. And then when it doesn't turn out the way we want, we beat ourselves up. But like, there's this whole other thing that we should be blaming instead of blaming ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have just a couple more minutes for this part, and then we're going to move into a couple activities. I wanted to pull a couple more questions here. There's one from Ali or Ali. I don't know how to pronounce it, but they wonder how successful you have been in maintaining a distraction-free phone. The urge to get back those infinity pools on your phone is so strong.
It has been, it has gotten easier and easier for me. I've been doing it for like 7 years now. And and
maybe, sorry to interrupt, but just for context, when we talk about a distraction-free phone, this is something that we wrote about in our book, and Jake, you've written a bunch about it, but it's the idea is not to fiddle with like notifications or like little settings or try to resort to like tricks, blocking yourself or whatever, but to really go to the source and say, hey, if I don't want to be like getting pushed around by this thing, if I don't want to be getting, tugged around, like I'm going to just like go to the source and I'm going to remove anything that has that power over me, that ability to kind of suck me in and cause me to feel like I wasn't using my time well. So it's a phone that has no email, no social media, no news, no games, no streaming video.
Yeah. And the philosophy, I mean, it didn't come from like a philosophy. It came from me being really frustrated with myself for being distracted when I was with my kids, and just being angry at myself and the phone and deleting everything. But what I realized about why it has worked so well for me is that by actually taking off everything that even hints at being an infinity pool, everything that has an infinite amount of content that I can go down, when all that stuff is gone, then my mind is totally clear. My relationship with the phone changes. When it's a compromise, when some of that stuff is there, it doesn't work for me. If you find that it's not working for you, I would suggest that you consider if there's something you can, like, what are you looking for when you go to the phone and the stuff isn't there? What do you want from it? And is there a way to give yourself that thing in a different way to substitute what you're looking for? So sometimes people will say, like, if you want to create a new habit, one of the things you can do is when there's a trigger, when you start to want the thing, that you have something else you do instead. I found recently I was drinking way too much coffee and tea in the afternoon and was kind of frying my energy and messing up my sleep a little bit. So I was having a hard time stopping that. I thought, you know what, I'm going to try to replace the thing. So instead of, when I have that trigger that I want like a hot beverage, I have peppermint tea, and I drink peppermint tea now like crazy. In fact, I'm drinking it right now. And the peppermint tea has become the thing where it's like, oh yeah, it's a thing I'm doing. Great. I got the tea, and I got the ritual of like go down to the kitchen, make the tea. And if you told me that before when I was drinking coffee, I would have been like, what a loser who's drinking peppermint tea instead of coffee. Coffee's so much better. But actually it's worked for me. And the benefit of better energy is worth it. So similarly with the phone, what's the thing that you want? And it might be that you're like, God, I really need to check in on Facebook because it's part of my business or something, right? I've definitely talked to people who say that. And then you might say, well, okay, well, if it's for business, and is there a way I can only do it on my laptop? Can I just do it on my laptop so it just becomes isolated a bit? It's not always with me. Or if I have to take it with me, do I have an old phone lying around somewhere that can just be my work, like Facebook phone, so that my main phone that's like in my pocket is not the thing for, for all the time. But it might be as simple as, sometimes it's just as simple as like, hey, there are those moments when I just want a little fun something on there, but I just don't want to get sucked into it for too long. And I will admit that I have an app on my phone that is totally frivolous. It's the sneakers app from Nike. They've like released new sneakers. I'm totally into that. And I love it because there is something new every like day or two, but that's it. It's just like one new thing every day or two. And then like everything else is old. So I'm not going to get stuck looking through there because it's not very often. It's not really an infinity pool. It's just like a little puddle of something good. And maybe that might be enough too. The nice thing about that is it's never going to be more than a minute that I'll spend looking at that thing. But I do get that feeling of like fun, just kind of like something that's just for fun. So that would be my advice to try, like go all the way instead of part way. That's part of what makes it work. And if you go all the way and it's still not working, just try to dig into what is aggravating you about not having it, and see if you can get at it. The last little piece I'll say about this, because I know we need to shift on to the next section, but we were talking a lot about the coronavirus, or like just the what's going on in the world and how it relates to these topics of how you spend your time. And like I said, my son got really sick with what we think is coronavirus, because of course there's no tests at the beginning. And there was a moment when we realized we had to take him to the emergency room. He ended up going to the emergency room like I think 3 times. But he'd been a couple times, and he'd come home and he's continuing to have breathing problems. And we're talking to the doctor on the phone, and the doctor said, I think you're going to need to take him in to get him tested, because they thought, and it turned out that we couldn't get him tested after all, but they thought that they had relaxed the restrictions enough that they'd be able to test him since he hadn't been to China. And so he said, but if they test him, they're going to put him in quarantine. You won't be able to see him. And you won't be able to see him until after presumably gets well. And of course, like 16-year-old kid, not high risk for the gravest, results with coronavirus. But you can't help but wonder. You're a parent, like watching your kid go out the door, and my wife took him and I stayed home with my younger son, and I had to hug him and think to myself, like, man, I hope I see you again. And that was a horrible moment and a horrible night. And as they came home, and like I said, he's fine, but I had that moment. That was like the darkest scenario that I think any of us can think of with this situation. The silver lining to that really dark side of what's going on in the world is that it's a stark reminder of our mortality. The fact that we don't really control how long our lives will be, and what will happen beyond the present moment. And it goes by fast. Life goes by fast. And I realized that night, I thought, boy, if the worst thing happens and today was the last day that I got to spend with my son somehow, did I spend it right? The choices that I made about how I spent my time, were they the choices that I'd like to have made? Was I as present with him as I could have been? Was I dinking around on email this afternoon, and I think I was that day, and I was kind of kicking myself, like, why wasn't I checking in with him more? And it's not to say that every day you got to be perfect with your kids. You got to be perfectly attentive with them. But if you have felt the stress or feel the stress today or whatever of this virus, try to look for the way to turn it into a positive in the sense of what is important to you in your life and how can you draw more attention to it. Always drawing more attention to the things that you care about and being more purposeful with how you spend your attention. So for me, how I spend my attention, drawing more attention to it always comes at a cost. It comes at there are trade-offs. I'm less responsive on email than I'd like to be. I'm really slow to get back to people I wish I could get back to. I don't often sometimes see some friends as much as I wish I could, because I want to really focus on one thing at a time. I want to spend as much time, that's quality time, as possible with my family. And those things have costs. So some of the things that we talk about, I'll ask you to do, some of them are easier, some of them are a bit painful, but I think that pain is worth it. And I think that what's going on in the world shows us how much it matters that we don't give into the defaults and let our lives go by in a blur, because life can stop, hopefully years from now, but it could stop sooner, and you want to get your money's worth. Yeah,
that's a great spot to end this segment. So thank you, Jake. Thanks for sharing all that. It may not be the easiest thing to talk about, so I appreciate it. There were a lot of good questions that we did not get to. So at the very end, I'm going to share a way that you can get in touch with us. And so if you want to follow up over email or something and send us a question, we can try to answer that way. But thanks to everybody who posted questions, because there was some really good ones that we were not able to get to. So should we do some activities now?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we got 5 minutes left. I'm going to share my screen again. And Jake, you should do whatever you want to do. Stay on.
I'll stay on, but I'll try not to slow you down, which is usually my role in things that John and I do together, is to slow us down by talking a lot. So I'll try
color
to not
commentary.
do that. Color commentary.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to, the activities that we're going to do together, they are taken from our book, Make Time. Make Time has a collection of 87 different tactics, no joke, for helping you focus on what matters. And today, in the remaining few minutes, we are going to share just 3 of them with you. So we're going to go through 3 that I think they're both kind of essential to everything we've been talking about, this philosophy, this way of looking at your time and your life. But there are also 3 that have been really useful for me over the last month, as we've been on lockdown. We've been trying to stay safe and take care of ourselves. And if you're interested in exploring the rest of the 87, before we go, we'll share a bit of info about how you can do that.
In short, by Make Time.
The very first one is, fittingly, it is tactic number 1. So it's literally the first tactic in our book, and it is to choose a highlight for your day. And to explain this, I want you to think about the end of the day. So, here in Milwaukee, it's almost 6 o'clock. And so maybe, thinking a couple hours ahead when, it's dark out, and sort of reflecting on the day and looking back. And I think, maybe a nice question that you might ask yourself is, what was the highlight of my day? What was something good that happened today? Something that made me happy, something that I was really glad I finished, or just sort of satisfied to have finally made the time for it. And so I want you to hold that picture in your head, but now we're going to flip it. So instead of kind of waiting for the end of the day and looking back, we're going to think about the beginning of the day. So what if you began your day by asking yourself, what will be the highlight of my day? This is super simple, and it sounds like it wouldn't make a difference, but it really does. And I want you to try it. You can do it now if you want, if you've got something to write down, or you can do it later today for tomorrow morning, whatever. But I want you to think about the one thing that you most want to make time for, and write it down. It might be something that needs to get done. It might be something you've been meaning to get around to. It might be something that's fun, or maybe something that is going to happen no matter what, and you just want to make sure that you can kind of bring your focus and your energy to it. Of course, this highlight will not be the only thing that you do, but I find that there's a surprising sense of clarity and purpose that comes from thinking of your time in this way. So that's the highlight, and that's the first activity that we want you to try. All right, so now the second one. This is tactic number 13 from our book, and it builds on this idea of the highlight. So once you know what your highlight is, you can start to actually build your day around it, and that's what this tactic is about. It's called Design Your Day. And Jake touched on this briefly, but more often than not, our calendars, they kind of look like this. It's it's a bunch of little stuff that's on there, and these days it might even be worse. You and your spouse, you might be taking turns with the kids, or you're scheduling meetings around nap times, and it kind of it leaves these little scraps of time where it's not enough time to really focus on anything. But it also means that a lot of us, we kind of hate our calendars. It's like the calendar is the list that somebody else made for us of all the stuff we have to do, and it's kind of a drag. But I think our calendars can also be our plan. They can be, the list of stuff that we want to do and the stuff that is important to us. And that's the essence of this tactic of Design Your Day. Now, of course, nobody has complete control over their schedule, but you'd be surprised at how much wiggle room you have to move things around. If you reach out to people, you cancel some unneeded meetings or shorten others or move things out. I usually find that people are pretty excited to have one less meeting on their calendar. And maybe after you've made a few of these adjustments, then you can begin to really design your day. You can schedule in time for that highlight that we talked about. Maybe you decide that you schedule a morning routine, making breakfast or whatever. You can even schedule in a time at the end of the day that's sort of your log off day. That's sort of like, when I get to this point, I'm going to be done and I'm going to go and do something else that's not in front of the computer. And if you do this, then you've got a plan for your day. It's especially important right now during the COVID crisis, when so many of our normal structures and routines have been wiped away. But because they have been wiped away, this kind of gives us this brief opportunity to set up some of our own structures, like Jake talked about.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity right now to think each day about what you would care about. And even if it's, in this example, even if the only thing you can start off with is that highlight time, and it's getting 30 minutes or 60 minutes or maybe it's 90 minutes, but again, maybe it's just 30 minutes. If you can clear that one spot of time, and maybe you build out from there. If all of this seems impossible, that one thing can start to snowball and have a bigger effect. And even just having that one thing that you have control over is huge. And I find for myself has a huge impact.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I want to add one more quick tip about this, which is you may find that some of these activities actually become a part of your daily routine. And this is the idea of a calendar template that we talked about, where it's kind of the same thing that repeats over and over. And this is what I do. I have a template set up, and this is an actual screenshot of my calendar template. And I know it looks ridiculous. It doesn't look good at all, but these are all things that I plan, that I want to do, the things that matter to me. And this is kind of my starting point for every day. And so if I want to put something else in there, I have to decide what I'm saying no to. All right, final activity. So far we've been talking about what you want to make time for. So, choosing, scheduling your highlight, and that's kind of, you're playing offense, right? You're thinking proactively. But there's also defense. It's also important to sort of take this defensive view and figure out how to avoid distractions so that you actually can make time, so that you actually can be there for those things that you want to be doing. And so this tactic is number 24 in our book, and it's called Distraction Kryptonite. And I want you to think about your phone for a second. There's probably a bunch of distracting stuff on there. There's all the default apps that I talked about. Many of those are distracting. There's, of course, one of the things that's also cool about smartphones is that we can install our own apps, stuff that we find interesting or exciting. And all of those are distracting as well. But I have found that most people, they kind of have like one app that stands above the rest in terms of annoyance. It's almost like your kryptonite. So just as Superman is powerless when confronted by real kryptonite, you too may feel powerless when it comes to your distraction kryptonite. If you've ever like glanced at your phone to check the time and then 30 minutes later you realize that you're scrolling through Instagram, that's distraction kryptonite at work. So, could be social media, could be the news, could be email, could be games. And this activity that we want you to try, maybe as soon as this event is over and you turn your phone back on, is to try removing that kryptonite. Kind of block your access to it by uninstalling that app, by disabling it if it's a system app, by logging out if it's a website that you always check on your computer, or changing your password to that website so it's more difficult to get back in. You kind of built up some additional friction around getting access to that distraction kryptonite. So those are the 3 activities that we want you to try, and these are things that Jake and we use every day, and they make a big difference for us. And I think especially so in the last few weeks, the last month, for me, it's become, these tactics have been super useful. So hopefully you'll give them a try. One more quick thing before we go. We set up a web page for you. So if you go to maketime.blog/offline, there's a bunch of stuff there that can help you get started with these tactics. There's some resources, some things you can download. There's a discounted link you can use to buy the book. Actually, you can buy, it's from a Milwaukee company, a specialty bookseller that offers a really good price on Maketime. So hopefully you'll check that out. You can also find ways to get in touch with us there. And thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Jake. Really fun to chat with you. And have a good night, everybody. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, you guys.